So I'm here in my room. My computer is turned on in front of me, and there's my microphone. There's also a notepad open with some notes about my podcast. It's time to rewind. It looks like they're open to the 20th scene of Memento that starts in black and white at 47 minutes and 49 seconds, with Leonard taping a needle to an ink pen, and ends at 48 minutes and 27 seconds with Leonard breaking a second ink pen in half. There also is a Skype window open. Oh, hang on. Who is this?
Bubba! It's Lisa Leaheey from Rabbit Hole Podcast. You remember me, right? I'm your co-host.
Oh, of course, but I do prefer to be called Bubbawheat. And someone else here. Who are you?
Oh, hey, this is Andy Nelson from Marvel Movie Minute joining you today. How are you?
Oh, of course. I'm doing all right. And who are you?
Oh, hi, I'm Pete Wright, and I'm also from the Marvel Movie Minute. I follow Andy around in black and white.
Of course. Well, it's good to have you guys on here. It's we were talking, before we started recording, and we're getting into some of the shortest black and white scenes in this movie. So these next 3 weeks are going to be kind of shorter episodes, but there's a bit of stuff here.
I'm going to try not to take that personally, Bubbawheat, that you have me on these really, really short episodes. Hopefully it's not that I ramble too much,
No, of course
He doesn't
not.
answer. Oh, all right, I was thinking like,
yeah. That was a suspicious silence.
Yeah.
Feed my ego, would you?
There's not a lot here, and I think I wrote this down in a future week, but we don't talk a whole lot about what's going on in the color scenes at this point in the movie. But I do think that it's worth mentioning that this is pretty much where the Dodd scenes are going on, and this is basically this movie's version of an action scene.
My favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, and so these short scenes are, I imagine they're short for a reason, so that you can get back into the action of the Dodd scenes.
It
Right.
does add an interesting cadence to the streaming of the movie here, and how everything is just that really quick edit. So I think that definitely is intentional, as you say.
Yeah, even at the end of this clip here, we've got the breaking of the pen, which, all of that really, that's kind of, I guess you could say, an action beat within this scene that does connect us right into that other action. So there are those moments here that it is connective tissue, all of which ties together nicely.
Kind of a great punctuating moment, that snap.
The snap, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just going to say
right.
that use of sound in these sequences is particularly notable, just the way the voices work and all of the clicking as he sets things down on other things, and it's all super visceral.
Even the taping, when do you hear taping that's quite as loud as this?
Yeah, and it's also, that these are very close-up shots. They're very, the pen itself and the needle is very big in frame, and the camera pushes in on Leonard's face as he's doing this. And I feel like that also mirrors his focus, because his attention span, he is very focused on this task, and the audience is also very focused with all these close-ups.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he does say, that you're able to do new things as long as you keep your attention on what you're doing and you don't get distracted. So I do agree with you on that. He's got just the pen and the lighter right up to his face, so he can really keep an eye on things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And, but before we get too much farther into what's going on in this scene, which isn't a whole lot, I did want to ask Andy, what's your background with this movie? Do you remember, whenever you first saw it?
Yeah, this was a movie that I happened to be visiting a friend in L.A. The weekend that this opened, and we went and saw it. It was just a packed house out there, and I remember it's something that we had heard of, so I know that we had been excited about it, and we went and watched it opening night, and just, I mean, it was one of those movies that just kind of blows your mind. And after we came out, I know just like it was nonstop conversation, like piecing all of this together, the forward and backward nature of the story and everything. And it was just, it's a movie that instantly became just a favorite, and something that I love the crafting of it. And I think that when you look at what the Nolans did with putting this story together, I've always found it to be still one of my favorites that Christopher Nolan has made. It stays way up there for me.
Yeah, I think this is one of my Christopher Nolan favorites as well. I've kind of fallen off following his movies later on. I think mostly just because with a couple kids now, my movie watching at home tends to be my media watching tends to be shorter attention span, so I've switched to a lot more TV than movies. And so, like, if I'm watching a movie, it's like I have to have a reason for it. Like, am I watching this to record a podcast on?
Yeah. I resemble
you don't
that
have
one.
an arbitrary 3.5 hours to sit and watch one of these films.
Yeah. And, I wanted to take a moment to about, this, for these next 3 weeks, this is all about him, doing this like homemade tattoo. So of course I did do a lookup. I did look up some information about if this is like an accurate method.
Did you try an at-home tattoo, Bubbawheat? I hope you didn't use some, weird YouTube how-to video here.
No, I didn't do that, but this is a fairly accurate method to making a homemade tattoo. And there are a few other steps that somebody probably should take if they were doing this. And 3 weeks from now, whenever we actually see him putting the needle to the skin, from my point of view, because I've watched like a lot of tattoo programs, with like professional, like Ink Master and Tattoo Redo and stuff like that. And the thing that I notice is I feel like he doesn't have a very good needle technique, because his needle is like, angled.
Mm-hmm.
When it should be like more of a 90-degree angle whenever he's poking into the skin. And the other thing that I noticed that a lot of homemade tattoo techniques do is it's very important to get the depth right. And a lot of people suggest like tying a thread around the needle to basically prevent it from going in too deep, which he doesn't have that. So,
well, that's interesting.
I don't care for any of this.
Would it actually have been better to like tape the needle so like only the right depth was actually protruding from the bottom of it, so that when he pushes the pen down, it's like it can't go any further than the proper depth.
Mm-hmm. Right. And this is like basically referred to as a stick and poke technique.
Ah, very technical.
And this is actually a very large tattoo to be using this type of technique. I feel like this would be a very long process and a very painful process. But most of the time, whenever you see one of these like stick and poke tattoos, they're very, they're only like 1 or 2 inches big.
Well, he does it so quickly over the course of this scene. I like to think that he just uses the actual tattooing, the stick and poke, just to kind of like do a few like the shape of the letters, and then he just turns the pen around and actually just colors in the rest.
It's a little connect the dots.
Right, exactly.
My daughter actually has 2 of these tattoos, and she's a kind of, I don't know, I want to call her a survivalist, but that might be too extreme. She teaches outdoor survival skills, and she works with a group of people out in the woods. And she came home from a summer of teaching kids, and she had 2 tattoos on her foot and ankle, and she got them in the woods, like the least sterile place you could go to get them. And my image, the only thing I have is this movie to fit my mental model of how she got these tattoos. I will say she has survived. She didn't get any sort of tetanus. That was good news. But she did say it wasn't as painful as you'd think. It was not as painful as you'd think. I think it's very painful, so that didn't help a lot. but it is possible, and they can look very, very nice. They don't just have to be words and license plates.
Well, and I suppose that it really boils down to what color of ink you're using. So, I mean, there could be black and blue, I suppose, are obviously going to be the most common
Easy ones.
too. But, if you get one of those pens with the 4 colors, you've got a few more options.
Andy, that is officer thinking right there. That is, you have a creator's heart.
Yeah, and also I saw that, the majority of homemade tattoos and the stick and poke technique recommend using still tattoo ink because that's going to give you the darkest black, and anything else is most likely going to fade
Right.
Relatively quickly as far as tattoos are concerned, and not last nearly as long as professional grade tattoo ink.
Did you find any research using pen ink and whether or not a ballpoint pen is better than a gel ink pen, or the gel pens with the sparkles in them? Anything come up for that research?
Not about the different types of pens, but I have seen that, people don't recommend using pen ink, but I did see some comments of people that had used pen ink for their own tattoos.
If you're in a pinch, the Bics are going to be the best, huh? All right.
And his method of sterilizing just putting the needle into the flame, that's also pretty accurate of how you would do this tattoo. And aside from wrapping thread, this is pretty much this is a very accurate representation of how you could do a homemade tattoo.
Wow.
So, kids,
good to know.
When you're finished scrolling Instagram,
we do not condone this. Let's make that crystal clear.
Right.
Disclaimer for all the kids listening.
In fact, I think those pens are called Crystal, actually, now that I think about it.
And this is one of the short clips where we do actually get some dialogue from Leonard. And I think that line is also worth talking about. It's a very brief, but he's still having this conversation about Mr. Jenkins or how Mrs. Jenkins didn't understand that you can't bully someone into remembering. The more pressure you're under, the harder it gets. And I think this is also this is a perfect time to ask you too. That a lot of this, if you're watching, it kind of, every character is an unreliable narrator. And especially with Leonard's story about Sammy Jenkins. And it calls into question of whether or not Sammy Jenkins actually is Leonard. So what do you two think about that? Do you think that Sammy Jenkins is actually Leonard and it was his wife that survived the attack and had diabetes?
I think that's a real open question, and I think it's one of those things that Christopher Nolan loves to do, is to offer you the opportunity to think about that. And I think over the years, my opinion has likely changed. But I did go back. Andy and I recorded a podcast on this movie some years back, and I went back and listened to it today, and I'm pleased to say we didn't have a good opinion on it then either.
It's so interesting because you do get those flashes of him and his wife, and was it a pinch? Was it a needle? How does that play out? And the idea of these cloudy memories and the fogginess of how we remember things, particularly how he remembers things. I find that to be such an interesting element of the story. And I don't know. I kind of think that it makes sense for it to be him who did accidentally kill his wife, but at the same time, as Pete said, I like that Nolan has found a way to employ this type of storytelling in a number of films now, where I don't know if it necessarily matters which way the answer is, because I think what he's trying to say is that we'll never know because he'll never know. And, I don't know. I find that to be really unique in his storytelling style.
Yeah. The other thing that I noticed about the way he says it he says the more pressure you're under, the harder it gets. And I get the impression that the way he's describing it is as someone who's experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Even though he's talking about Sammy, and he wouldn't know how Sammy was feeling, if it was harder or easier for Sammy to remember things under pressure. But and technically, I guess he also wouldn't really know that for himself, but he would kind of have this feeling, and especially if it's something that he's talked about through repetition.
That's also what's so beautiful about the architecture of it and the treatment of the black and white, because, like, lest we forget, Nolan is making a noir film here, and going into black and white exudes that sort of classical sweatiness that comes in that narrative style. And so his line talking about the pressure of the repetition, even if he isn't consciously aware of it, we become much more consciously aware of it as the repetition sets in, as you rewatch the film and you realize what he's been going through. It doesn't even matter that he's not conscious of it, because when he does become conscious of it, he's going to forget it the next day. And that's the like hard edge sort of the steel of the movie that I think makes it so good. And even this 28 seconds, glorious 28 seconds, I think really it continues to drive that home. It's very sharp edged, and both in sort of the dialogue and the visuals.
Yeah, well, I think we covered, maybe a lot more than we expected to in this 20 seconds. But that's the end of my notes, unless either of you have anything else that you want to say about this clip.
Not really. Just I wonder if he'll know that this never calls them back, because
he does ask them to call him back.
Yeah,
and
he does, but will he actually know that?
And does he remember that he asked for it when the person does call back?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we will kind of see that. I mean, that's. I mean, we'll get there, but that's that moment of that. Who is this? That's kind of exactly where I take my opening from.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me for this week and the next few weeks. Absolutely. And why don't you go ahead and for anybody else that hasn't heard you guys before, why don't you take a moment to let them know where else they can hear you online?
Absolutely. We, as I set up at the top, we run the Marvel Movie Minute, where we're breaking down the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. We're currently in our 6th season talking about the Avengers, so people can tune in for that. And then we have another movie show that Pete will fill you in on. Yeah,
that show is The Next Reel, where we cover exactly one movie at a time. And we've been doing that since 2011. We've got hundreds and hundreds of movies grouped in series, and this movie in our collection was in the series Spoiled, Rotten. So it was part of a little short series of movies where we asked the question: if you know what it's doing, does it make watching it again less interesting? So fun series that we'd like to cover. You can find that over at thenextreel.com too.
And thank you, as always, Lisa, for joining me on these black and white scenes.
Always a fun time to be here.
And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group, and you can join that to discuss episodes as they come out, as well as have discussions about other time loop movies, TV episodes, or anything time loop related is welcome there. And until next time, I assume I've already told you about Memento?
Oh, only every time I see you.
Well, then call me back.